Can you hear me? Okay. Aloha. It's wonderful to be with all of you. The whole purpose for the Hawaii Culinary Foundation and what we do, and I know many of you have heard this before, is all of you. We're the reason that we put together fundraisers to bring programs to your campus. We had one such fundraiser like this on Sunday night, an Indian dinner for 200 people. And those 200 people were there because of all of you. They believe in that you're the future of Hawaii's culinary scene, and you're the folks that are going to be raising the bar going forward for what we're eating in restaurants and hotel properties and your own establishments. So really want to congratulate your teachers and Chef Don, who serves on our advisory board for the Culinary Foundation, for dedication to your education. But our whole mission is to bring in things that are unique, educational experiences, ingredients, flavors, and people in the community who have a very unique perspective of what's happening in the food scene. And what's more fun to talk about than chocolate? I mean, this is really probably one of the most delicious workshops that we've had because everybody loves chocolate in some form or other. And not only is our speaker today a farmer and producer of chocolate, but has a long history in the business. He is Seneca Klassen, and I had the pleasure of visiting his business, and I'm sure he'll explain to you his farm operation and also his shop in Honolulu, and tasting their chocolate, and that's what you're going to get to experience today. Seneca has been involved in the chocolate industry for a long time. I gave you his bio, but he has been both involved as a farmer and also in operating a bittersweet cafe in California, and was one of the early craft chocolate makers. And he was also involved with the Good Food Awards. And I don't know if you've heard about that, but there's been a lot of buzz about that if you go online, because there's been some folks in Hawaii that won some Good Food Awards, and I believe you've won those as well. But he was involved in the Good Food Awards, and he can maybe explain that to you as well, and as well as involved in slow food. So has a unique perspective both from the farm. It's going to take you on a little bit of a journey to the North Shore where some of their chocolate is produced, and then lead you on a tasting of chocolate. And we're right in that sweet spot between, we were just talking Christmas and Valentine's, when chocolate is the hottest topic going. And as chefs and aspiring chefs, that's certainly going to be something that you'll be able to use in your professional work going forward. So great pleasure to have Seneca with us. I know he's super busy, but he's taken time out of his schedule to be with us today, so let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hey guys, how's it? Everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm Seneca Klassen. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thanks for having me out here. So what I want to do first is just talk story with you folks about everything that happens for us from starting on the farm and working its way through the process of chocolate. A lot of people love chocolate. Maybe they have very warm feelings about chocolate experiences that they've had, but maybe not so much information about what its origins are as an agricultural product or what the realities are of producing chocolate, especially on a craft or small scale or locally. So I'm going to give you a little window into the world of what we do and kind of why we do it, and then we're going to spend probably most of the time eating chocolate and having a conversation about the things we taste, because that's sort of where I want you guys to have an entry point. Hopefully I'll offer you some things today that'll spark some interest. Chocolate's not a monolithic flavor. It's very, very nuanced. It has a wide, wide palette, and there's a lot of potential with exploring that palette that's not really fully realized or developed, especially in a local context. So I want to open the doors to that and sort of give you a snapshot of where we're at with Hawaii grown and made chocolate and take it from there. So what we do in our little project at Lonohana is starts on the farm. We run a 14-acre farm that's up on the North Shore at Kawailoa Plantation. That's Kamehameha School's land up above Haleiwa town. So we're on the old soils. Yeah, let me move this up a little bit. Better? Okay. So we're on the downslope of the North Shore, facing right above Haleiwa town. And everything for us begins up there on the farm. So farming, we consider ourselves basically a farming company first, and everything that progresses from there starts with the origin. And so what we do is grow cacao trees in an agroforestry context up there. Cacao is a true tropical tree, and growing it in Hawaii can be a little tricky. It's very place sensitive. If you want to think about the most naturalistic home for cacao in Hawaii, you probably want to picture something like the Hamakua coast, somewhere very wet, very humid, very truly tropical. Less wind, the better. So you can imagine when we're growing it up on the north shore of Oahu, we got some really tricky conditions. We have very persistent winds, we have a lot of exposure, a lot of sun, a lot of heat. So these are basically things we need to compensate for by adapting our farming to the local conditions. What we do with agroforestry is create, basically, off of old sugar land, a brand new forest for the cocoa to live under. So in that lower right, you can see sort of where we start. We establish these blocks of forestry windrows to protect the cocoa from the daily winds or from the extreme events and the winter south winds, stuff like that. And then we establish the cocoa and other shade trees inside those blocks. So we're basically mimicking the dry lowland forest that once existed on Opaiula Ridge before the Europeans showed up, using some native species like koa, milo, ko, and also some exotics like mahogany, Honduran cedar. And so we have this agroforestry model that leads to these guys. You guys are familiar with cacao fruit? Yeah, if anybody's interested, we can crack these after if you've never had a chance to try fresh fruit. It's delicious and doesn't taste anything like chocolate, but it's a really nice experience. So chocolate's a fermented food. This is actually, for me, was one of the key inroads to getting interested in realizing the profound diversity of flavor that exists within the food, and that all starts with fermentation. Probably 70-75% of the flavor that you taste in a finished chocolate comes from here. It starts on the farm, and it starts with the microbiology of the place. So this is a very heavily terroir-influenced food, just like wine, just like beer, just like coffee. Any of these things are dependent on the microbiology of the place and the fermentation that results. It's a wild fermentation. So we break these fruits open, we take out the wet seed, as we call it, so the seed with the pulp, fruit pulp still around it intact, and we put them in hardwood boxes. And the fermentation is just an encouraged and supported wild natural fermentation. So yeasts and bacteria that are present on the farm are doing all the work for us, and we're there to make sure the conditions are appropriate and support the wild fermentation that's going on and make sure that it's happening in a phytosanitary and healthy way. This is not our normal drying conditions. This is our factory in Kalihi, but I thought it was kind of hilarious with Kalihi in the background and a little drying rack going. It's a small batch that we had fermented and we brought down to the factory to watch it dry off. But regardless of whether we're doing it in Kalihi or on the North Shore farm, it's a sun drying process. So we do it in a big hoop house on mesh racks. The cocoa ferments for about 6 to 7 days. This is variable depending on the conditions and what's happening exactly at the end. It's very sensory oriented. We're observing exactly what's going on with the beans and where we want them to finish up. Drying's the same. It's really an extension of the curing process. And so it's best imagine it just as part of the overall curing of the cocoa and not really like a discrete separate thing. You're fermenting in the boxes and then you're distributing onto the racks and slowly bringing everything to a close. So this enzymatic cooking that we're doing is really, really key components. Like I said, we're creating all the precursors. The precursors of the majority of the flavor of the finished chocolate are happening now. So this is like a really important component to be involved in. So one of the most exciting things about being able to verticalize the process of chocolate making in a local context is to be able to have all of these tools of control at your fingertips. It's really dynamic, it's really complicated, but it's also really exciting because you can see things going right and wrong in real time and have a direct impact on the final flavors. So after drying and the beans sort of settle out for a while, we usually age them for a bit before they're ready to roast and process in the factory. We're going to roast them, so we're going to cook them again, this time with heat. So chocolate's kind of a unique food in the sense that we cook it twice. We cook it enzymatically, then we let it rest, then we cook it with browning. So it takes both of those types of cooking to make the flavors that we associate with chocolate. If you just dry out cocoa and you don't ferment it and then you roast it, you don't get a chocolate flavor. You get a kind of a nutty, fatty thing. Conversely, if you just dry it out but you don't roast it at all, same thing, even less flavor is developed then. So only with the combination of a fully realized fermentation and a good roast, do you have chocolate flavor, and hopefully good chocolate flavor. Then we're going to take those beans and we're going to crack the hull off of them, and we're going to get just the nibs. So as you can imagine, on those racks that are up in the country, even though they're in a hoop house, they're somewhat protected. They're not supervised 24 hours a day, right? So this is not exactly a sanitary process. A bird might come by, a mongoose might come by, a rat might come by, right? So the surfaces of the dried fermented seeds, we don't consider them food safe. So we definitely want to discard them. Even though they've been roasted, there are mycotoxins and things that are not heat sensitive that don't go away that easily. So from a sanitary perspective, this is a really, really important step. In our factory, that's all this room does. And if you see most chocolate facilities that you might visit anywhere in the world, you're going to see winnowing as a very discrete space that it happens. There's a lot of dust that's created. You don't want that dust spreading to other parts of the food manufacturing facility, right? Because it might be a contaminant. So after winnowing, the husks and the nibs are separated. The husks go back up to our farm where they're great mulch. So that's a nice little closing of a circle that we're able to do because we're a local integrated company. It's a cool thing about having agricultural production in the same area as final product manufacture. You get to reuse some of these things that are waste products in other settings. Refining and conching of nibs. So once you have their nibs, basically the rest of this is crushing. So from a food manufacturing perspective, nibs are really interesting. They're more than half fats. So they look and they crunch like a solid thing, but really what they are is a fat suspension in a very stable, solid form. The minute you subject them to stress, you realize really quickly that what they really are is a non-Newtonian fluid. And the minute you add that stress or change the conditions of temperature or pressure, they will get into a state of flow. So very quickly from the left to the right, you can change what looks like a solid object into something that's running with the texture like a thick ketchup in about 5 or 6 hours. These pictures are sort of beginning and end. So at the left, you can still see there's some texture to the nibs. They're not fully ground down. They're not in a full state of flow. And on the right, that's actually days later. But really, you could get to that state in terms of like the visuals within a day or so. So basically, those stone grinders we use to refine the size of the particles. Particle size distribution is a really key component to how we're going to be able to taste chocolate when it's a finished product. And we're also developing the flavors and adding any other ingredients that are going to go in there. The simplest case, like the first chocolate we'll taste, is just 2 ingredients: sugar, cane sugar, and nibs. And then it goes from there. You might amend the fat content by adding a little cocoa butter back in certain formulations. So we'll talk about that when we're tasting. Tempering and molding of the chocolate. So the last stage before we wrap these things up and deliver them as chocolate bars is getting them into good temper. You guys have probably all seen chocolate that has come out of temper or bloomed. So you've seen like a candy bar or something that's gotten hot or cold and it's developed that whitish, powdery texture on the top. What that means is that the fats and the solids are falling out of suspension. And so the fats or sugars, depending on which condition, are migrating to the surface, trying to separate. So we don't want that to happen. We want a nice, shiny, snappy, lovely, glossy looking chocolate bar. Especially in our case, we're delivering very high value little packages, and we want to make sure that the experience is really excellent all the way through. So it's got to be good from the packaging all the way down to when you open the thing and break it into pieces. It's got to be snappy and in good temper. Tempering chocolate is just like tempering steel or glass. We're trying to get certain component molecules to line up in coherent chains so that they form a really stable setting, a fat suspension that's stable. In this case, there's several different molecules that are sensitive to different heat ranges, and we're trying to isolate for these ones called the beta-5 crystals in the fats, in the cocoa fats. Those are the crystals that have the same kind of heat comfort range as human beings do, so they're the best ones for us to identify. There are ones that are comfortable at higher temperatures, and there are ones that are comfortable at lower. None of those work really well because, of course, where we store chocolate tends to be where we live, in the conditions in which we live. So beta-5 crystals, that machine on the left is an semi-automated temperer that allows us to do that quickly and pretty easily rather than table tempering, which many of you guys, if you go through pastry courses, might have to learn how to do. It's a good skill to learn. It's a weird thing to get good at because it just takes putting in the reps, and eventually you learn to do it. You learn to identify when you're seeing the crystal formation, when you see things coming into temper, and how to keep them at a working temperature and still moldable and pliable. This machine lets us skip a few steps and get work done because we got to mold thousands of bars, so that's obviously important. And last thing is for us, since we're taking things all the way to retail, since we run our own retail shop and we have a membership model, we actually do a lot more direct retail than we do wholesaling, which is just one of those unique features of where we are as a company and what the market is like and the way we do our business. But obviously, chocolate's a very packaging sensitive product, so this is something that takes a lot of thought and polish in terms of like how you're going to present this thing. And you know, if I'm going to put a Hawaii grown and made chocolate on the shelf for $16 or even more, it better look amazing. And so it needs to back up that value at every level, right, with the core product itself, obviously, but all the way up to. All right, I think that's all we want to talk about there. And I know I'm running through a lot, like a little complicated food process, but you guys can throw questions my way. Once we're tasting, it's sort of, a lot of things will probably come up organically, so feel free to just let me know when there's stuff that we want to talk about and we can have a conversation about it. The tasting sheets that are on the back, they're there to be kind of a mind opener and inspiration. They're not definitive. I want to make that really clear. You're not necessarily going to find these aspects in any given chocolate. But when you, especially if you're not accustomed to thinking of chocolate as an object of, you know, Epicurean interest, like it's good to have these sort of suggestions in front of you as things that might happen. You know, you're going to get a lot of, with the Hawaii grown stuff that we're going to taste, you're going to get a lot of acidic flavors. You're going to get a lot of dried fruit characteristic, a lot of acid, a lot of stringency from tannins as well that comes together. So, you know, look for things in that category. When we get into we're tasting one milk in this little session, you're going to obviously get all of a sudden all these dairy and caramel notes and things from cooked milk. So just keep an eye on this as a set of inspirations, not a hard and fast guideline. I don't, you know, anticipate that you're going to find these exact things in these chocolates that we're tasting, but it's good to open your mind about what chocolate can be like and give it the full range that it actually possesses, allow it to have those things. So with that said, I think let's start passing the chocolates. Yeah, so these are labeled. We're going to go with the first one. We're going to taste these from most dark to most sweet, by the way. So we're going to do this kind of more or less the way you taste wines in a weird way. So least sugar to most sugar. The first thing we're tasting is actually from Hilo District. So as I was saying earlier, like one of those natural homes of cocoa for Hawaii. This is grown just above Hilo town, near a cemetery. This is a 70% dark chocolate. It's just 2 ingredients. So it's just nibs and sugar. 70% nibs, 30% cane sugar, that's it. Use all your senses too. Warm up the chocolate with your hands, give it a smell. There should be enough, I hope there's enough for you guys to take maybe a couple small samples each, so like don't be afraid to revisit it, think about it. So feel how interesting and fatty this tastes. One interesting thing about Hawaii grown cacao is it's very, very high in fats, and that has to do with our distance from the equator. Basically, the trees are actually a little bit stressed out this far north. I know that sounds kind of weird, but for them, they're like literally a true equatorial tree. And so every little bit you take them away from the equator, they get a little change in day length that they're not expecting. They're in what botanically we call recalcitrant seeds. So they don't have a way of overwintering or maintaining themselves in a stable state to wait to be transplanted or to make a new tree. As a result, the only method they have to store up for the winter, so to speak, is by bulking up on fats, which is exactly what they do in our growing environment. So what we tend to grow up here in all the Hawaiian Islands, but especially the further north you go, on Oahu, Kauai, we grow very, very fatty little seeds, which means we can make formulations and not add any extra fat down to around this 70% mark very comfortably. The next one we'll taste is a little bit different, but I'll tell you why when we get to there. Any comments, anything interesting you guys are finding about that? Bitter, sorry, you said, like what? Like cooking chocolate. Interesting. Yeah. Somebody said bitter? You get a lot of bitterness from that chocolate? Are you sure it's bitter and not tart? It's a fine line. It's an interesting one to bring up because this happens in tastings frequently, and there's actually like it's actually something to explore and think about more when you're tasting different things. Because to me, there's a lot of acid, there's a lot of tartness, but it's not bitter. There's an awful lot of acetic acid. Basically, if you smelled these beans before we processed them, you'd get intense hits of vinegar. And that's the secondary part of the fermentation that's happening. So the second half of our fermentation, roughly, is acetobacters and lactobacters eating alcohols and making acids. And so you do get like an awful lot of that in the raw materials. And a good acetic part of the fermentation is actually really important for us because it gives you lots of options as a chocolate maker. If you don't have high acid production, there's nothing you can do to recreate those kind of fruity and interesting flavors. Okay, should we move on to the next one? So number 2 is from our farm on the North Shore. This is also a pretty simple dark chocolate with one difference. It's a tiny bit sweeter. So this is 67%. Of that 67%, there's 2% added cocoa butter. So what this formulation really is 65% nibs, 2% butter, 33% sugar. So this is a 3-ingredient dark chocolate instead of just 2. So see what you find in this one. These should be the ones with 2 on the plate, the one that I've just described. So I think those are coming around slowly. So the 1s were the first one we tasted, the 2s are 67%. And see if you find any differences in flavor from the first and the second. Anybody find anything interesting? Any differences there? Sweeter, sure. Yeah, but not too much. Surprisingly, 3% difference in sugar, yeah, but the sensation of sweetness is much more present, right? Yeah, so it's interesting to see what a small change in ratio can do. We've got a little more fat too, so there's like a little play on there. But it's also what the cocoa's bringing. So it brings a natural sweetness to a certain extent as well, so the origin makes a big difference there. To me, I get a lot more chocolatiness in this chocolate, even though it's a little sweeter. It has more base notes, more presence of that kind of cocoa flavor that was kind of missing from the first one, if you ask me. A little bit different, yeah. Okay, let's do number 3. 3, yeah. So we'll move out of the dark realm and into the milk. So this is a 50% milk. In the crafts space, we tend to call these dark milks these days. And the reason people started using that term dark milk, it's a little confusing, but industrial milk chocolates can have as little as 8% cocoa content. They can be almost all sugar and milk and still qualify as milk chocolate. But you're really tasting no chocolate. You're just tasting fat and sugar, which is okay. But to identify a sort of a slightly different category, this term dark milk started coming up in the craft space. That means milk chocolates that are made with at least 40% cocoa solid content. So this is a 50. So and you can find them up to like 60, 65%. So percentages that would be in the dark chocolate category, but with the addition of milk. So you have this kind of mixed, interesting new kind of character. So this has a little sea salt on it too, as obviously you will have felt. This is Molkai sea salt and a 50% milk chocolate. So, 50%, yeah. So one thing that's interesting about milk chocolate, so this chocolate probably, I'm gonna guess, tastes like, if you'd imagine stripping the salt is there to kind of balance things, right? Because it makes it a little less overwhelmingly sweet and treacly. If you imagine stripping that out, this is probably the sweetest thing we've tasted, right, perceptually. It has exactly the same amount of sugar as the 70% dark that we tasted first. So the other components, though, the milk gets caramelized as it goes through the refiner, right? So there's not active cooking, but it heats up to about 120, 130 degrees. It does cook the milk sugars. So you get this like perception of sweetness that's very different that comes from that product, even though as far as cane sugar in the formulation, it's the same as a 70%, as a dark chocolate. How do you guys feel about that one? It seems like the room relaxed with that. You guys are like, that's better. Okay, number 4, we'll just keep going with these. This is a dark milk with coffee. So this is Ka'u coffee from Rusty's. And this is a 60% milk chocolate. So it's another dark milk chocolate, but it has coffee ground into it. So you're not gonna feel any bits or pieces, but you're gonna get a very discrete sensation of coffee flavor from this. So if you don't like coffee, maybe pass on this one. Yeah, a lot darker in color, right? Which is interesting. Even though it's still a milk chocolate, it has the appearance of a dark chocolate. You might not guess that there's milk in there at all. 60. So the formulation of this is 40% nibs, 20% cocoa butter. I think it's 15% coffee, 35% milk. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, coffee's an insanely dominant flavor, huh? Yeah, so this is an interesting challenge when you're a small chocolate manufacturer. When you do these strongly flavored things, you got to really clear out those flavors because we're sharing machinery from one batch to the next, right? So we have to really be careful to establish our production protocols so they run from dark all the way to these really strong flavors, and then everything gets thoroughly cleaned out. One funny thing about working with chocolate is you don't clean anything with water. We clean with fats because chocolate is insanely hydrophobic. It does not like water content at all, and you'll never be able to temper anything again if you get a lot of water. It's also very hygroscopic, so when you're manufacturing chocolate, it wants to suck any water it can from the air. Yeah. With fats, we clean with cocoa butter. Yeah. So when we're cleaning out our machinery and trying to like clear a coffee flavor from the temperer, for instance. Oh, she's asking a follow-up question about cleaning with fat and not with water, and what that means exactly. So. Yeah, I was just clarifying what it means when we clear out these machines and we clean them with cocoa butter. So we have to use the fat that came from the chocolate because that's actually really important. It's important legally. We actually have really good restrictions and laws in the US, believe it or not, on definitional qualities of what chocolate is and is not. And to call something chocolate, it cannot have any other vegetable fats other than cocoa butter. That's the only fat that's legally includable. And if you add other stuff, it's no longer chocolate. It's a coating compound. If you look at candy bars, you'll see it's very clearly labeled. It never says chocolate. There's a reason for that. It's not technically chocolate anymore once those other things are involved. So it's a confection or it's a chocolate coating compound. You'll often see that term. So these are important to us as small chocolate producers because obviously like these definitions really matter to us at these small scales. We really want to make sure people understand what we're doing and try and be very clear about what we're making and not making. Because there's a big difference between what we do in industrial processing of this food. And so that's an important line. Yeah. You guys have any questions about anything we ate? Chocolate making, cocoa growing? Want to talk a story about any of that? What? We don't do regular tours, but you can always reach out to me, and we're happy to take folks that are local up there whenever we can. Yeah. So I brought some cards, so we can reach out and definitely. We sounds funny, but we don't tend to do tours for visitors so much. We do, but we're happy to do tours for local folks, especially folks like you guys who are really interested in the food industry and the ag space and everything that goes behind that, because that's an important component to us. It's a big reason why I started doing things working this way all the way from tree to finished product is, it's a very complex process to manage. And in some senses, it'd be a lot easier to just pick one of these things and do just that. But to be perfectly honest, the reason why we do what we do has a lot to do with showing people that an integrated system of food production for something that people love is possible. And these value-added products can often be open doors for people to look closer at the ag space. And we have a lot of issues, as you guys know fully well, with food sovereignty. And although chocolate isn't something anybody needs to live on, it can open conversational spaces to talk more about our food system and the integrity of it. And localizing stuff is something that's really important to me. And chocolate's one of those things that it gives an opportunity to educate more about chocolate too. A lot of folks have a great relationship with chocolate but don't know much about it, and to some extent the industrial chocolate production world likes to keep it that way because the realities of cocoa production in the cheap commodity producing parts of the world are really, really nasty. There's a lot of exploitation of labor, there's child slavery, there's all kinds of bad stuff that happens out there. So to some extent, like here in Hawaii, we have opportunities to create little good, clean, fair, slow foodie moments in this otherwise kind of not so nice space, and that can be beautiful. So yeah, so we're happy to take people to the farm. It's a long way of saying that. Yeah. Yeah. That's not very many places. So we have a little shop that's in Salt in Kakako, right by Moku Kitchen, if you guys know where that is, or Highway Anya, that same little space. And that's the best place to come find it because it's actually open and the chocolate's all there. And it has the best selection of things that we have at any given moment. It is possible to buy things online from us too, and we do ship to the mainland and all over the place. But the best place is if you can make the time and and you can get into town, like to come see us at that space, because there's we call it a tasting bar because there's always at least 8 or 10 different things out and available for tasting, which is nice. You can really like see the range of things that we're making, and you don't even have to buy anything, although we'd love it if you did. But it's available and always there. So that's the best way. Yeah. That is a good question. So it's small but growing quickly, and there's a lot of interesting projects on the horizon. So that on the ag side, it is probably the case that we only have about 250 acres of cacao, producing cacao amongst all the major Hawaiian islands. So it's really tiny. But the interesting thing is there's probably at least that much on the horizon for planting in the next 2 years. So it still won't be a lot, but in the next 5 years or so, there's going to be a really substantial increase in the amount of cocoa produced on the agricultural side. It's not clear what that will mean for local chocolate making, but I think it'll definitely give better options for some local chocolate makers that don't also do farming. And for instance, even though we run our own farm, we still need to, like that Big Island bar, for instance, we still need to source from outside our own farm. We could make, I think theoretically we could probably make twice as much chocolate as we're currently making if we had access to the raw materials. So there definitely is a bit of a bottleneck on the ag side for us right now in terms of like just locally grown and produced chocolate. But there are companies that are scaling up pretty healthily, like Manoa over in Kailua. They do a mix of locally grown and outside of Hawaii, and those guys are making probably 16 to 20 tons of chocolate this year, whereas we're probably only going to be making about 4 or 5. So I don't know which side of it you were actually asking about. In the cocoa production, like ag side, there's about 200 acres, so maybe 100 tons next year of total produced. And then on the chocolate making side, there's probably a bit more than that. Yeah. That sounds like a crazy amount, right? 200 tons of cocoa. Believe it or not, it's not. It sounds like a big number, but it's great. There are factories out there that make that in a week, So for everybody in Hawaii to be doing that in a year is like, it's not really it's a drop in the bucket globally. It's crazy. The farming side, so the question is which side is more profitable, farming side or the manufacturing side? There's no money in farming. That shouldn't be probably a surprise to anybody. Yeah, if you, so just to set a context, the global commodity price for cocoa is hovering around $3,000. That's really cheap. So let's say, to be very generous, if you wanted to buy the best cocoa in the world, you might have to spend $8,000 to $10,000 a ton. Metric tons is the language we usually speak in that, so this is like 2,200 pounds, yeah? So a metric ton of cocoa might cost you, let's say, really generously, $10,000. Amazing cocoa, the best in the world. Our farm gate price, so the best we can determine the cost that our actual farming costs is about 2.5 times that. So it's probably about $25,000 a ton for us to grow the cacao here in Hawaii. So you can imagine, like, I could either go buy the best product in the world from elsewhere for $10,000, or I can buy local for $25,000. Those are basically your choices. And that's just farm costs, so that's not making any money. That's our break-even price, yeah? So it's not a competitive product on a commodity basis. And even if we get much bigger and much more efficient at farming, it's never going to be. And chiefly that has to do with labor costs. Like, this is what comes from actually growing an agricultural crop in a developed place. Wine's super expensive because the agricultural crop is grown in the developed world. So that's basically the model that we're kind of adopting with chocolate here in Hawaii. It's a big challenge, and what it means is basically it pushes us to take it further, right? Because the elaboration of cocoa beans into finished products is where all the money actually is. And that's why if you look at where chocolate is historically produced, it's very colonial. It's grown over here, it's produced up here. Well, it's because that's all the money is over there, right? So they buy cheap, they sell high. And that's how the industry has grown. So we're trying to basically find a way to make a go of it by producing a fine finished product locally so that we can actually recycle that value within the community that produced the agricultural possibility in the first place. That's what's important to me. That's one of the things that's exciting about verticalizing this food is because you can do that. You can actually like deliver the value back to the place that created the value rather than just pulling it from one side of the world to the other and telling that side to go, you know, basically like deal with that, be poor. Yeah, but yeah, all the money is in producing finished products, basically. That's the truth about chocolate at large and even at a craft scale. But even as craft manufacturers, you know, that's hard to make a living. So even if you're just buying these really fine raw materials and you're trying to make this food at a small scale, it's really energy and labor intensive food to make. And the market is not necessarily very mature at all. It's very, you know, like right now to go and tell most people, you know, pull somebody off the street and go like, hey, you can keep buying a Hershey bar, or I got this thing that's gonna cost $10 and they're the same size, what do you want? Most folks don't have any educational context to know like, oh, well, maybe that thing that costs $10 is way more interesting and it might be worth $10, but it might be a different kind of experience. Like chocolate's not really there yet in the same sense that coffee and wine and beer are. We're behind those kinds of foods by a lot. So it takes a lot of education, and it takes a lot of outreach, and it takes a lot of just like proving that concept to people before the value, that discrepancy in value is really something that people are willing to pay for. It's coming, but it's still like very developmental. What I think we've proven to ourselves over the past few years of doing this is that it is possible for us to grow and make, you know, some of the best chocolate in the world locally. And that's a great place to start because we kind of have to set that bar really high. The values of this stuff is so high. We have to be making amazing things, not just sort of average. So that's great. I think we've established, not just us guys, but like lots of folks working in chocolate have established that it's possible to do that work. So that's a really cool place to start. The great thing is we have a combination of factors here. Even though we're in this very isolated place, we have millions of visitors, and we have a large enough community here at home also to support the development of this product. And a lot of people want to buy local and are willing to pay for local if it's available. So that includes not just local folks, but also visitors. So I think in the future, I think there's a huge opportunity. We're at this really niche-y, like top of the marketplace with our products and exactly what we do, and it's very particular, but that has to do with our scale, just where we are in development. What I think is out there that's a possibility is a much broader range of pricing and availability of Hawaii grown and manufactured chocolate products that goes all the way down to the mid-market things that are $5 or $6 and all the way up to the $20 and beyond for a very special bar. And if you get down into that territory, all of a sudden, you know, if we get enough massive ag throughput, and we can scale up the manufacturing to meet it, we'll be able to actually achieve some scale that will make it possible for us to manufacture products that'll be really, really good, but priced competitively with Valronas or, you know, probably not Berry Calbo because that is cheap. But, you know, if we can start chipping away at what's available in pastry kitchens, and a lot of pastry chefs that I've talked to are like, I would love to use local products, but it's just not there, you know. But if you can, you know, if you can offer something that's competitive in flavor and behavior and pricing to stuff they're already using, but is locally grown and made, I think there's a huge opportunity within the visitor industry to displace some of those other products and use local products instead. And I think that could be a great marketplace. So that's something I have my eye on that I think will come in the next few years, but only as some of us manufacturers kind of can rise to meet and get to those places. There's definitely like opportunities for growth in the more like elite, very high priced, very special things as well, but they're always going to be a little more niche-y, I think. So what's kind of exciting to me, honestly, is just a broadening out of the industry so that we're able to access people at different points, different kinds of experiences, different price points. And I think that'll come, but it's an issue of development on both sides, on the ag side and on the manufacturing side. There was one other one, yeah? Yeah. Yes, this is interesting. So the question is, what do you give advice to restaurants to expand the availability or presence or storytelling of chocolate, just like do with wine and cheese and things like that. This is going to take some time. And right now where it tends to happen is, so for instance, we recently had a good friend of ours is a chef who came to us and said, hey, I'm doing a gig for the premier of China. There's no budget. So we want to use local chocolate. And it's like, it doesn't matter what it costs. Well, we're giving this dinner and it's going to be all local products. And so I was like, hey, great. That's an easy yes for us, right? Because it's like, it doesn't matter that it's a very expensive product. That particular event, it works great. As I was just saying, like, as we kind of get out of that very niche-y price point and availability and we can broaden things out, I think it'll get a lot easier. Pastry kitchens are financial centers for restaurant operators. They need to make money. Pastry and, drinks and pastry, that's got to make good money for the restaurant. Otherwise, they're not making it. So I understand it's hard when you got to, if you go into one chef, and even if they're a real believer in local products, but you've got a product that's like 5 times the cost, it's just like, they're kind of like, I'd love to do it, buddy, but it's too much, And conversely, there's not really like enough awareness quite yet to put, a cheese and chocolate plate out as a dessert. Like, it's kind of a non-starter in a lot of places. People if they're looking for chocolate, they want it in some pastry form, right? They don't want to just be trying to taste chocolate at the end of a meal. Maybe that will come. I'm not super convinced about that one, but I think it's definitely a possibility. It may always be a bit of a peculiar offering and not necessarily like super mainstream, but I think it is possible over time that we'll get to that, people will be like, yes, I want to have a nice coffee and explore a little bit of chocolate and have that be the end of my meal. Right now that's, even if you're eating in Europe and stuff, it's not really there. They're much more likely to have a cheese plate and a coffee than to offer you anything chocolate at the end of a meal. And I think, so I'm not sure that's really the spot we're gonna see a huge change in. But it's possible. It's possible, but it depends on the interests of the chef in question too. Like, it has to be something that's compelling for some reason and works within the overall context and concept of the menu and everything else that's going on. Yeah. Yes. So this is another way in which cacao is way behind other cultivated crops like wine grapes or coffee berries or coffee. Oh, are there different cultivars of cacao? Are there different species? So even just back when I started working with chocolate, maybe 15 years ago, there used to be this 3-term combination that everybody used to define what kind of cocoa we were talking about: Forastero, Criollo, Trinitario, which are 2 of which are kind of junk catch-all terms. In the past, let's say 5 or 6 years, on the very nerdy, like geeky fringes of cocoa, it's become more and more apparent that there are at least 14 or 15 different identifiable cultivars, and that they do have specific flavor correlations. Those cultivars tend to deliver specific kind of flavor ways, and you cannot tease them apart and identify them. But we're a long, long ways from being able to correlate, like, we grow this variety at this site, and that's why this chocolate is so special. Like, that's going to be an awfully long time out in the future, especially for Hawaii. Most of our orchards in Hawaii are still seed planted, and cocoa, just like apples, is a heterozygously seeded, sexually reproducing tree. So if you plant a seed, you're not getting a copy of the mom, you're getting a reproduction, probably an F1 hybrid of the mom and some other pollen donor from somewhere around, right? So there's 30 or 40 seeds in those things, so you got 30 or 40 half siblings probably. So when you plant an orchard like that, you have an overly diverse environment. So it's not really possible for us to go to our Hawaii orchards right now and go like, this is a Katongo orchard, this is a Criollo orchard. Like, it doesn't really, they're not planted true like that. Over time, we will be able to, we're already doing it on the farm. We're identifying certain producers, gene mapping them, which is something you can get done for free through USDA. So you can understand exactly what that tree is. And then if you make a grafted clone of that tree, now I've got 12 copies of this precise blend, right? So over time, what we're going to see is probably farmers identifying certain things, giving them names, and saying, well, this is my cultivar that I've identified, and I'm starting to kind of grow that out, and identify certain flavors that they like. And over a long period of time, that'll turn into more storytelling that's all the way down to the detail of, okay, what kind of trees? Right now, we're more at the level of, here's where our farm is. This is what we think this farm means for flavor, for the following reasons, but we can't really tell you, like, it's because of the genetics of the trees. That's like a bit of they're all mutts at the moment. Yeah, so that's a long ways in the future, but it's another interesting thing to keep your eye on, because yes, there definitely are identifiable strains within the family, and they do have meaning. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the other hard thing about orchard, because the question was on that tangent of species, like how long does it take to actually for a plot to grow up and actually start fruiting and behaving. This is the really challenging thing about working with any orchard crop, is your development cycle is long. Cacao doesn't start fruiting, well, sometimes you'll see fruit in like a year and a half or two, but generally speaking, it's non-representative and will probably deter the tree from, like you've all seen like a mango tree with that first fruit on it, it's like, oh, like you clip it, right? You don't let it bear fruit that season because it's like, it's not ready. We do that with cocoa too. So usually it's year 3 before we see like meaningful production. And mature production won't come for 5 or 6 years, sometimes 7 years. So it's a long cycle, right? To actually track that at minimum 3 years to know like what that tree is and what you really got on your hands. And then if you want to copy it, well, you're going to have to like go grow some seedlings, graft those seedlings, plant those seedlings, and you got to wait another 3 years. Yeah. So that's why I say we're a long ways out from that kind of reality. And it's probably like, by which I mean like intergenerational. Like if my daughter takes over the orchard, like maybe her kids will be able to tell a really coherent story about exactly what those trees are, because they will know by then. But it's a ways off, yeah, and it just has to do with the realities of orchard cultivation. It's long, takes a long time to develop. Yeah, yeah, we do that. We do, in addition to the bars, we have some drinks and hand-rolled truffles and things like that that we do that are kind of special and very unique. So these are just simple hand-rolled ganache truffles, but we make them, they're very fresh, and they're fresh cream truffles. They're designed to be eaten pretty quickly after we produce them, make the ganaches and stuff. And so, yeah, it's a fun place to check out. Speaking selfishly, there are there's not just the chocolate to try, but also like some other interesting things. And we're always there. The people who work there are amazing, and are always happy to talk story about all these things that we're talking about right now. So it's a nice place to just engage and be able to check things out. So yeah, I definitely encourage you folks to go. Like I said, yeah, you don't even need to buy anything. Like it's just a place you can come and get this kind of experience and explore. That's really what it's there for. Yeah, you're welcome.